A notorious 1978 airport heist that inspired the movie Goodfellas is replaying this week. More than 3 decades after $5 million in cash and $1 million in jewelry were stolen from a Lufthansa Airlines cargo building at John F. Kennedy Airport, 5 men were arrested this week. It's still a crime that people are talking about 35 years later.
5 people said to be part of a New York crime family were arrested on Thursday, including a 78-year-old man accused of participating in a notorious 1978 airport heist that inspired the movie Goodfellas.
Hey, Mom, what do you think?
You look like a gangster.
More than 3 decades after $5 million in cash and $1 million in jewelry was stolen from a Lufthansa Airlines cargo building at John F. Kennedy International Airport, the FBI arrested Vincent Asaro, an alleged leader of the Bonanno organized crime family, on robbery charges. 4 other men, who prosecutors said were members of the New York-based gang, were arrested for other crimes. Vincent Asaro devoted his adult life to the Bonanno crime family with a criminal career that spanned decades, said U.S. Attorney Loretta Lynch in a statement. Gerald McMahon, the elder Asaro's attorney, told reporters outside court that his client was framed by shady turncoat gangsters.
He didn't do it, had nothing to do with it. Pretty much all the people that did it got murdered by Jimmy Burke, so I read. So the fact that my client didn't get murdered would suggest that he didn't have anything to do with it. So I'll start right there.
Asaro pleaded not guilty in a brief appearance at U.S. District Court in Brooklyn, and his attorney said he would fight the charges. James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke was played by Robert De Niro in the popular Scorsese movie adapted from the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi. Affiliated with the rival Lucchese crime family, Burke was the suspected mastermind of the brazen crime that stumped investigators for decades. A break in the case came after an FBI investigation of a New York property tied to Burke last summer turned up human remains. Burke himself died in prison in 1996 while serving time for the murder of a drug dealer. Asaro was charged with 4 criminal counts, including robbery and conspiracy to commit robbery in connection with the Lufthansa heist.
Dr. John Paitakes from Seton Hall University joins our discussions now, along with Dee Dee Benkie and Jackie Guzda. Welcome back. We haven't seen you for a while, Dr. Paitakes.
Thank you.
Well, you know, we saw that big FBI jacket there, and you know, my question is for you, Dr. Paitakes. We'll start with you. Doesn't the FBI have something other to do, something other than cracking a 30-year-old crime?
Well, you have to remember, I mean, there were a lot of federal offenses involved in this also. A number of people were murdered. You know, a number of people were, you know, bilked out of money or whatever. So it was an ongoing investigation for a long time. The difficulty was that as people started coming forward, they were killed by their own gang members or whatever. And again, it was $6 million, or $5 million and $1 million in jewels that has never been recovered. You know.
And certainly not making light of this as well, because you're right, a lot of people did lose their lives. But one of the quotes from the movie was, murder was the only way that everybody stayed in line. You got out of line, you got whacked. And so half of those, like you said, half of the people now, I mean, I would have loved to have been behind the scenes in this investigation and just know who was on the scene maybe 30 years ago, but certainly amazing. And I know you're a big fan of this movie.
I am. I love Goodfellas, and most of my students just think of it as a cult movie. You know, it's really interesting because you have all the crime families in this New York region. And this is not the only time that you have such an interesting story. You have the Gotti family and how Sammy the Bull, his right-hand man, was having a picnic in the backyard, and the family dog came up with a human hand in its mouth at that party. So, you know, you're right. If they were going to keep everybody in line, and you got out of line and you snitched or whatever, you got whacked.
Yeah.
And so you can tell Jackie, she's getting so excited about it, but everyone does. People love this mafia stuff. Even, I mean, I think because it's true life, these things really happen, and it's amazing that it does. And it's hard to believe almost, but it's fascinating.
Well, we were talking, you know, and I'm an Italian from New York and New Jersey, so, you know, we were always a little, we're not part of that.
That's
right. But Dr. Paitakes, talk about the investigation. I mean, what does it take to do this? You teach criminal justice.
Well, I mean, it was long term. Now, also remember that they're not divulging all the information or whatever, but they were wiretapping. They had informants, some reliable, some unreliable, and you know, informants sometimes get paid or whatever. You know, and so it was going on for a long period of time. Actually, it was an inside job, as you saw in the news or whatever. One of the cargo workers at the airport at the time was the one that helped orchestrate all this and gave him the information or whatever. So instead of just arresting a few people, they usually want to get to the head of it. And so they could have made arrests, I'm sure, years ago or whatever, but they really wanted to get as many people as possible, you know. So I think now there was a total of, what, 5 or 6 that were arrested.
But what kind of a message does it send to the mob?
Well, that, you know, there's mob all over in every single state, some maybe perhaps more in the Northeast or whatever, but that, look, however long it takes, we're going to get you. In other words, you know, that crime can go undetected for a long period of time or whatever, but eventually, and this is a good example, that even after 35 years, I mean, on a murder, there's no statute of limitations, you know, so if you've murdered somebody, whether it takes 50 years or 100 years, you can still be prosecuted. So I think that's the thing they want to set the tone, that, you know, is there a perfect crime?
This all started with finding the human remains, which is just amazing to think that that's how it all came about.
Well, when she mentions John Gotti, now if you remember, he was also known as the Teflon Don because every time he got to court or whatever, he had a great team of attorneys. He wasn't getting convicted until Sammy the Bull, one of his main henchmen, who had assassinated almost 100 people. They promised him immunity if he testified against it, and that's the only reason they got Gotti.
It was a snitch.
Right, it was a snitch.
Right.
Now, if Sammy the Bull was smart, he would have never got in trouble again.
Now,
but where is he now?
He had a high IQ. Sammy the Bull.
Well, nobody said they were ever dumb. They have high IQs. They just use it in the wrong way.
Yeah,
from what I found from
that's why
criminals.
snitches get whacked real quick. Because it brings everybody down. So if there's even, you know,
when you
any
say about a
instance
high
of that, they're
IQ,
gone.
now you know what happened with Sammy the Bull? They changed his name. He was out in the Midwest or whatever.
Yes.
Okay, instead of saying I got away with 100 murders or whatever, he created a drug factory in his cellar, and he's in prison now. So you know, when you say they are bright, but they're using it in the wrong way.
But there's such characters. I mean, you would never see these characters in any other part of the world.
And they like the risk. I mean, that's the whole thing. That's part of that personality. I mean, you want the danger and the risk. And heck yeah, you'll murder somebody just to cover up what they're doing. So it's just a different, you know, it's almost too bad Dr. Bart's not here because this person, you know, it'd be like the psychological profile of these types are just different types of people.
Well, speaking of that.
But still, I mean, you teach criminal justice, but to keep going on this investigation and to go on, I mean, I would have thought that some people would have given up. And that's why I said, like, you know, here we have the FBI 35 years later, you know, didn't they have something better to do? I mean, and I use that as a little bit, I didn't mean that in a completely serious way, but I'm saying 35 years to investigate this crime.
Yeah, now again, we don't know, and I don't know the exact workings on a daily basis of the FBI, but if you ever watch cold cases on TV or whatever, I mean, that's what they do. Now, when there are other major things happening, it's not every day that they're working on it. Perhaps they put that aside, and now all of a sudden, maybe a new director comes in or whatever, and that's his or her priority. So, again, I mean, you know, there's changes in administration, priority of cases, et cetera. But going back to what Dee Dee said about the I'll stand in for Dr. Rossi. He's a good friend of mine.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, my observation is, and I'm not a psychologist, but I've interviewed thousands of people and I've read thousands of psychological reports. I think a lot of these people have a psychopathic personality, meaning that you have no guilt or remorse for what you do. So how can you kill somebody and then go home to your wife and kids, go to church, sit down and have a steak dinner, and act normal?
Well, that's what happened to Goodfellas. It was amazing.
Yes,
you know, they go to the mom's house. He's got the meat cleavers. Yeah, I'm just cutting off a deer's antler, and he's like, it's nothing.
But let me ask you something. Do you consider yourself a cop from way back?
Myself? No, I wasn't a cop. I was a probation and parole officer.
Okay,
but anyway,
so cop light.
Yeah,
so
cop
let me ask you a
light.
question. I had an opportunity to long-term interview a New York City undercover cop for 20 years. And what he said to me, he dealt with the mob, he dealt with the Colombian drug cartels. And he said that the cops and the mob are cut of the same cloth. That after running around and trying to bust
there's a theory called the 1% theory. And in the biker world, or if in certain different gang wars, they will have a 1% tattooed on their wrist. And they say if you're above the law, meaning if you're a police officer or an officer or a criminal, you are a 1%er. That's where that comes from.
So, I mean, what was your bottom thing on that?
Well, the bottom thing is he stated, he said after work, you'd see him at the same bar drinking together.
Oh, I don't know. I think
Well, I
it's
mean,
a
there are always going
generalization.
to be maybe some good cops, bad cops.
Yeah, I know a lot of police officers or whatever who don't fit that mold. You know, so you know.
Well,
that's
let me
hard to
just
do.
ask one last question for this. When you talk to your students now and say never give up on an investigation, is that one of the things that you'll learn from this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's never, look, is there a perfect crime? Perhaps. But again, this is a good example of that. Look how long, and it was well planned out when you talk about how they set it up and everything, and maybe that's why it went so long or
Yeah,
whatever.
but this is a big prize. You knew they weren't going to give up on the crime where Goodfellas was set on because everybody's still fascinated with
Yeah,
it.
and there'll be a second sequel or
Yeah,
you know,
let's
ongoing
hope.
things.
And I just want to leave you all with one last quote from the movie. Whenever we needed money, we'd rob the airport. To us, it was better than Citibank. So that
Yeah.
is the final quote from Goodfellas.
Well, I didn't put the lock on that on your bag. Yeah.
We have much more to come. The lightning round is next. We're talking Grammys, what's next for the Beaver, and we'll also take a look back at history. Don't go away.